It's the Friday Cocktail, presented by Anna Glavinsky.
Right now, we're being joined by our next guest. It's Valerie Trouet, talking about the rings that you get inside of tree trunks. Now, this is definitely going to be all about stories and storytelling and what these things that are found inside of some of nature's giants can tell us about the history of the planet. Valerie, hello, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing really well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you. So tell us, what drew you to write this book about the circles inside of tree trunks? It's a very, very specific niche topic.
Yeah, it is a very specific topic, but it's a really nice topic to talk about and to write about. Because I'm a dendrochronologist, which means that I'm a scientist who studies the rings in trees, the tree rings that a tree puts down every year. And many people are familiar with the concept of tree rings. They know that a tree forms a ring each year, and that means that you can count those rings and get an idea of the age of the tree. But much fewer people know all of the information that we can extract from those same fairly straightforward tree rings. So they record our history, our human history, climate history, forest history in their rings over the lifespan of these really old trees.
And to get a bit of context for this specific study of yours, what did you say the word was for what you study? Sorry?
It's called dendrochronology.
So
it's
a dendrochronologist. How many of you are there in this community?
It's hard to say, but I would imagine maybe around 500 in our annual meetings. There's around 400, 500 people. Yeah.
And how did you get into that world? What was it that drew you into this niche?
When I was looking for a topic for my master's thesis, I wanted to travel. I wanted to go abroad. I was always interested in trees, and I was interested in the climate. And then I had never heard about tree rings or dendrochronology before, but this topic came up, and it would allow me to travel. It would allow me to study trees and to study the climate. So that's what I picked. And then when I went to Tanzania, I collected tree ring samples. I came back and then started studying these samples, the wood in the lab. And that's where the magic happened. It's such a lovely, lovely field of science to be in, because wood, when you look at it through a microscope, it is phenomenal. It's beautiful. It all makes sense. The rings are beautiful to look at. And then what we're doing, the actual action of doing tree ring science it's like solving a puzzle. You're trying to match the patterns and the rings that you see in one tree with that of another tree. And it's really like a jigsaw puzzle that you're trying to put together. So between the beauty of looking at the wood and trying to solve this jigsaw puzzle while, answering questions about trees, about the climate, I really enjoy doing that, and I've never stopped doing it.
Well, so if you're going to sprinkle a little bit of this magic on us and put us under your spell, what are some of the things, or the first things, not your discoveries, but when you were first learning more about tree rings, other than that first example that you just gave us? If you count the tree rings, it gives you a year, and you know how many years the tree has been alive. What things really fascinated you and blew your mind about tree rings that you didn't know before that you can share with us?
Well, one thing that I'd never thought about is that, the rings that a tree forms, you can study them not just in living trees, not just in trees that are alive now, but the rings are preserved also when a tree dies, and when we build a building out of it, or when we make a musical instrument out of it, you can still see those rings, and you can still measure those rings, and you can still work with those rings. So this allows us to date, violins, for instance. We can say the exact year when a tree was cut that a violin in the 18th century was made out of, for instance. And this I find, very fascinating. I came into this from a forestry background, and it turns out there's so many applications to study our human history as well. It's very, very interesting.
And so what are some of the other things that are preserved within inside these rings? I'm really worried at sounding completely stupid here, but,
No, not at all.
Is it like gases? Is it things that have touched the tree and then stayed preserved, or what? I almost don't even know what to ask. What's there? What's inside it?
Well, I'll start. Our basic thing that we study is really the width of the rings. We literally measure the distance from one ring to the other. And that gives us a lot of information about the circumstances under which this tree grew in each year of its lifespan. If you have a 500-year-old tree, let's say, in some years it grew a lot, it formed a wide ring, and those are the rings when the tree was happy, when it had enough light, it had enough water, it was warm enough. And so we can read from the width of the rings, we can read whether the tree was happy or not in each of its 500 years. And that will then tell us about the climate in each of those 500 years, about forestry conditions in each of those 500 years, and so forth. So really, our main measurement is the width of the rings, how wide a ring is each and every year. And of course, nowadays we have a lot more technology. We can measure the density of the wood. We can measure the chemical content. We can measure radiocarbon. We can measure all kinds of other things. But really, by far and large, the primary measurement is, again, fairly straightforward. It's just measuring the width of the ring.
And then so that tells us a lot about the history of the tree. Are there changes, or what can the rings of the tree tell us about the state of the world and the planet today?
Today, yeah. I think one important thing, I told you that we can see whether a tree was happy, which years a tree was happy and which years it was unhappy. And if a tree lives in a cold climate, for instance, high up in the mountains in the Swiss Alps or in Scandinavia, it will be happy when the summers are warm, and it will be unhappy when the summers are cold. It likes to have nice warm summers so it can grow a lot and form wide rings. Now, any tree that you look at that comes from those environments, you will see that in the 20th and the 21st century, it starts growing wider rings. You can see the increase in temperature in almost every tree that you study. So over a 500 or 1,000-year-old tree, you will see that in recent years, you will literally see the temperatures go up.
Wow. So that is giving us actual evidence as to what's happening. Have we seen this in other trees, other times in the planet's history, in some of these older trees?
We've seen it in some areas, but we haven't seen it across the entire world. So some, for instance, Europe was warmer than it was before and after in medieval times, but that wasn't the case in the Americas, for instance. So it is this global expression of the warming. That's something that's unique to the 20th and the 21st century. And
how does a tree measure the passing of time as well? How does it know what a year is? Because it doesn't have a calendar.
Right, yeah. That's a really nice question. I really like the way you phrased that. So the reason why a ring is formed is that there is a growing season. The tree in spring, the tree starts putting out new leaves. It starts photosynthesizing, and then it starts growing new wood. And that's early wood. That's the wood that a tree forms early in the growing season in the spring. Towards the end of the growing season in summer, it forms late wood that looks a little different from the early wood. And then at the end of the summer, it starts growing all together. So a tree knows that it's the end of the year because the days get darker, shorter. It gets colder. it's winter, and so the tree hibernates basically. So every year there's a period in winter where the tree doesn't put on any new wood at all because it's too cold and too dark. And then the next spring it starts growing again, but it starts growing early wood, which looks different from the late wood of the last year. And so what you see when you see a tree ring is actually the boundary between the late wood of one year and the early wood of the following year.
And something, I've seen a documentary that says that trees actually communicate with each other, which is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Are those communications recorded in its rings? Are you able to pick up on that in your studies?
Oh, another really good question. I think what I was mentioning before, that what we do, the puzzle pieces that we're putting together, the comparing of the patterns of wide and narrow rings that we see in each tree, that's a form of communication. So all the trees that live in the same area in the same year will all be happy or unhappy at the same time. And so, because they're all experiencing the same climate at the same time. And so if you have a sequence of 100 years of trees from the same area, they will all show very similar patterns of happy years and unhappy years. And so that pattern matching is at the core of what we do as scientists, but it's also a form of communication because they all record their common history in their wood.
And do trees have unique personalities? Now, so that's a really hippie question, but you're just speaking to someone before you who was talking about the intelligence of different life forms on this earth. And you're saying that trees have, this commonality amongst themselves. Do they have individuality as well?
There's no doubt about that, because each tree, well, for one, each tree species, I started this conversation with talking about how the magic of looking at wood through a microscope drew me into this field. And each tree species, each different kind of tree has a unique wood anatomy. And so when you're a very good wood anatomist, you can detect what kind of tree you're looking at just from looking at its wood through a microscope. And it's so beautiful, and there's so much variation in it. So each species has its own personality. That you can see in the wood.
Can you give me an example, like how you would explain that to somebody, not necessarily through the microscope, but what sort of personality would a pine tree have versus an oak tree or something like that? How could you describe that?
Very flamboyant. Oak tree is very flamboyant. It has a very it has big cells in the early wood. In the spring, it wants to be really strong and grow fast. Whereas a pine tree is a little more, subdued, a little more boring as well. Like just same thing, same cell after same cell every year. So there's a lot of differences there. And then each individual tree has its own unique character as well, because they have a lot in common. They have the climate in which they grow in common. But then there is one tree might be attacked by insects one year, and that'll show in its wood, or another tree will have a big tree growing right next to it that overshadows it. And so it won't have enough light. And so for a few years, it won't grow a lot. And then that big tree dies and it gets a lot of light, and then it'll start growing a lot. So that's the unique personality of each tree. Not a single tree has the same life as its neighbors or as a remote tree. So you can read all of that in the ring.
I love your passion for this topic. How have you compiled it together into a book to make it readable for people who aren't necessarily in that community that you're part of?
I think what allows us to do that as tree scientists is, one, that the concept of tree rings is very familiar to many of the readers. Most people know that trees form a ring each and every year. so we're working with very tangible material. We're not studying some enzyme that you can only see through a microscope, or some galaxy or a black hole that you have to believe is there without seeing it. We're studying something that people know and can see with their own eyes. That's one. And two, then the breadth of stories, the breadth of history, the very many different stories that we can tell about our science from these tree rings. There's something in it for everyone. If you're interested in musical instruments, I can talk about tree rings and musical instruments. If you're interested in ice ages, I can talk about tree ring and the ice ages. If you're interested in this sun, or if you're interested in the Mayan kingdom, if you're interested in the Roman Empire, if you're interested in forest fires, if you're interested in Mary Shelley, of all of these things, I can tell you a story that involves tree rings, right? So there's something in it for everyone.
I think we need to get you on the show every week. I'd love to hear stories about each of those topics.
Sounds like a great plan.
My final question for you is, obviously you're studying trees that have been cut down or, fallen down, basically dead trees. Do you have a favourite alive tree, whether that's a species or, one particular tree that is important to you personally? Yeah,
there's one that's really close to my heart. For a variety of reasons, when I did field work in the Balkans, in Greece, and in Bulgaria, and there's one tree species, the Bosnian pine tree. It's local to that area. It grows very old, and it grows in the most beautiful landscapes. And so we called him Adonis. We cored him. It's a really beautiful old tree. Brought his wood back to the lab, and then when we counted the rings, it turns out that he was the oldest. Is still alive as far as I know, oldest known living tree in Europe. So it's a Bosnian pine growing high up in the mountains in Greece, 1,075 years old. And they're beautiful, beautiful trees. And then doing field work in Greece, it doesn't get much better than that. It's gorgeous. It's high up in the mountains, gorgeous landscapes, beautiful weather. Our work, when you do field work, you hike up for 2 or 3 hours in the mountains, you pour some trees and you hike back down, and then you're in Greece and the food is delicious and the people are friendly and the weather is nice. It's really is the best there is. So love this tree, Adonis, but also loved getting to work, doing the work that involved studying the tree.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to read out the name of the book and your name. Please apologies if I pronounce your name wrong. I'm saying it phonetically for radio so that people can look it up. I've been speaking to Valerie Trouet, and the book is called In the Circle of Ancient Trees. You can find it on Amazon or the Talk Radio Europe bookshop. Valerie, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much.